Emma Harris could feel the tension in the air long before she entered the grand ballroom of the Silver Lake Country Club. The event was meant to raise funds for local education, but everyone knew it was really just a chance for the town's elite to show off. She walked in, wearing a deep green gown that clung elegantly to her figure, and immediately felt eyes turning in her direction. Tom had begged off tonight, his idea of fun far from these high-profile gatherings. But Emma didn't mind being here alone. In fact, part of her relished it. The flicker of candlelight from the tall silver candelabras caught her attention as she moved through the crowd, smiling and nodding at familiar faces, her mind drifting. She loved Tom. He was kind, loyal, steady. But their life had fallen into a pattern she couldn't shake off. As she watched couples chat and laugh with the ease of old friends, she felt a pang of restlessness. She'd grown up in this town, married her high school sweetheart, and now, in her mid-30s, couldn't help but wonder what else was out there. It was during one of these wandering thoughts that she felt a hand lightly touch her elbow. She turned to find herself face to face with Daniel Blake. Impeccably dressed in a midnight black suit, Daniel was tall, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes that hinted at mysteries she couldn't place. Everyone knew of him. He'd appeared in town almost a year ago, making waves by investing in local businesses and showing up at events, always with the air of someone who didn't quite belong. Some whispered that he had ties to powerful political figures, though he never confirmed or denied it. "Emma Harris," he said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "I've heard about you." She laughed nervously. "I'm sure it's not as interesting as it sounds." He tilted his head, studying her. "Maybe not, but I sense you have a curiosity, a side you keep hidden from this crowd." Emma felt herself blushing, caught off guard by his directness. "I don't know what you mean," she replied, trying to sound unaffected. "I think you do." His smile was slight, almost mocking. "Let me show you something." He gestured toward a set of French doors that led to the balcony overlooking the lake. Before she knew it, Emma was following him, her heart pounding in her chest. The evening air was cool, and the sounds of laughter and clinking glasses faded behind them. For a moment, they stood in silence, gazing out over the water, the lights from the country club reflecting in the ripples below. "Tell me, Emma," he began, breaking the silence, "have you ever thought about what it would be like to step outside your life? To try something different?" Emma hesitated, feeling the weight of his words. It was as if he could see right through her, past the composed facade she'd spent years perfecting. "What are you suggesting?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. Daniel's eyes sparkled with a dangerous light. "An invitation, Emma, to see what life could be beyond the ordinary." She swallowed, her mind racing. She barely knew this man, and yet here she was, entertaining the thought of what, exactly? She didn't know, but the thrill of the unknown tugged at her, urging her forward. "Why me?" she asked, needing to understand. "Because I see something in you that's been waiting to break free." His words were so calm, so assured, that they sent a shiver down her spine. "Meet me tomorrow night. I'll text you the address." And with that, he was gone, disappearing back into the ballroom before she could say another word. When Emma returned home that night, Tom was asleep on the couch, his arm draped over a stack of papers he'd been grading. She paused, watching him for a moment. The lines on his face, softened in sleep, looked like those of a man who carried the weight of the world without complaint. Tom was everything she thought she'd ever wanted. And yet, she leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to his forehead, and quietly made her way to their bedroom. As she undressed, her phone vibrated on the nightstand. She glanced down and saw an unknown number with a single message. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m. The address followed, one she didn't recognize. Emma felt a thrill she hadn't felt in years, a mixture of excitement, fear, and the undeniable pull of something forbidden. She lay in bed, her heart pounding, thoughts swirling as she drifted off to sleep. The next day was a blur of mundane tasks. She went about her usual routines, all the while feeling the anticipation simmering beneath the surface. As 8 p.m. approached, she dressed carefully, choosing a simple black dress and a pair of heels that gave her an edge she hoped was more confident than nervous. She left Tom a note saying she'd gone to see Sarah, a believable enough excuse that didn't require too many details. When she arrived at the address Daniel had sent, she found herself outside a sleek, modern building on the edge of town. The entrance was unmarked, with dark-tinted glass that gave no hint of what lay inside. She took a deep breath and stepped through the doors. Inside, the atmosphere was dimly lit and pulsing with an air of exclusivity. Men and women mingled in designer suits and dresses, each conversation punctuated by laughter and hushed whispers. She spotted Daniel across the room, his eyes meeting hers instantly. He raised a glass in her direction, beckoning her over with a slight nod. As she approached, he leaned in, speaking quietly into her ear. "Welcome to a different world, Emma." She looked around, feeling the weight of every gaze on her. The room was filled with people she recognized, others she didn't. And yet, they all seemed bound by an invisible thread of secrecy, an understanding that what happened here stayed here. The thrill of it all was intoxicating. "Who are all these people?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Friends," Daniel replied cryptically. "Associates, people with influence." They mingled, moving from one group to another, Daniel introducing her to faces she'd only seen in magazines and on the news. She felt like she was part of a world she'd only dreamed about, a place where rules didn't apply, and where she was free to explore the limits of her desires. Just when she thought she'd caught her breath, Daniel took her by the hand and led her to a secluded lounge area. There, a small group was gathered, laughing and talking in hushed tones. Emma recognized a few of them, local politicians, business owners, people whose names held weight. And yet, none of them seemed to care about appearances here. It was as if this place was a sanctuary from the outside world, a place where secrets could be shared without consequence. "Tell me, Emma," Daniel said, his voice low, his eyes locking onto hers with a seriousness that sent a chill down her spine. "Are you ready to step out of your life, to see what lies on the other side?" Emma hesitated, the words catching in her throat. She didn't know what she was getting into, but the allure was too powerful to resist. She nodded, and Daniel smiled. A smile that promised everything and nothing at all. Emma woke up the next morning with a strange sense of exhilaration and guilt mingling in her chest. Last night felt like a dream, surreal, intense, and wrapped in mystery. As she sipped her morning coffee, Tom walked in, yawning and rubbing his eyes. He greeted her with his usual warm smile, his obliviousness to her inner turmoil a reminder of the life she'd almost left behind just hours ago. She couldn't shake the memory of Daniel's words. "Are you ready to step out of your life?" The question echoed in her mind, filling her with a blend of excitement and dread. The truth was, she didn't know what she was ready for, only that she couldn't resist the pull of something new, something dangerous. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. She looked down, a pang of guilt seizing her as Tom glanced over at her curiously. "Who's that?" he asked, trying to hide the faintest trace of concern in his voice. "Oh, just Sarah. She's asking if I want to grab lunch later," Emma replied, her voice steady but her heart pounding. In reality, it was another message from Daniel. "Tonight, same place, 9 p.m. Don't be late." Tom nodded, apparently satisfied with her answer, and headed out the door, leaving Emma to wrestle with her decision. Could she keep going like this? Could she continue down this path without losing herself, or worse, losing Tom? That afternoon, Emma met Sarah at their favorite cafe, determined to keep up appearances. As she sipped her iced coffee, she noticed Sarah giving her a scrutinizing look, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Okay, spill it," Sarah said, leaning forward with a smirk. "What's going on with you lately? You seem different. Edgy." Emma laughed, but it sounded forced even to her. "Edgy? I don't know what you're talking about," she replied, trying to play it off. "Come on, Em. I know you better than that. You've been distant, distracted. Something's definitely up." Sarah's voice had a tinge of concern, mixed with a hint of playful suspicion. Emma hesitated, considering what to say. She trusted Sarah, but part of her feared revealing too much. Yet another part of her craved someone to confide in, someone who might understand the thrill and guilt she was wrestling with. Honestly, it's nothing, Emma finally said, brushing it off with a wave of her hand. I think I just needed a change. You know how it is. Sarah raised an eyebrow. A change, huh? Well, if that's what you're after, there are healthier ways to do it. Like, I don't know. Maybe not getting mixed up with that mysterious businessman I saw you with last night. Emma's face turned pale. She hadn't realized Sarah was at the gala, or that she'd been watching her so closely. Sarah, it's nothing serious, she stammered, trying to downplay it. Just a casual conversation. Sarah studied her for a moment, then shrugged. All right, if you say so. Just remember, I'm here if you ever want to talk. But be careful, Em. Some things aren't as glamorous as they seem. Emma nodded, grateful for Sarah's concern but frustrated that her friend had noticed her slip. She promised herself she'd be more careful, more discreet. Whatever was happening with Daniel, she didn't want it slipping out, especially not to Tom. That evening, Emma found herself once again walking into the mysterious building, heart pounding as she spotted Daniel waiting for her by the bar. He greeted her with a smile, offering her a glass of champagne. To new beginnings, he said, clinking his glass against hers. She took a sip, the champagne cool and sharp on her tongue. So, what exactly are we doing here, Daniel? Daniel's expression shifted, his gaze turning serious. I wanted to introduce you to some people, he replied. People who live by different rules than the ones you're used to. Emma followed him as he led her to a private room where a small, exclusive group had gathered. They were all dressed impeccably, their expressions guarded yet curious as they took in her presence. She recognized a few faces from last night, local officials, business moguls, people with influence. One of them, a tall, silver-haired man named Victor, leaned in, his voice barely more than a whisper. You must be Emma. Daniel's told us quite a bit about you. Emma felt her cheeks flush, unsure of how much Daniel had revealed. She forced a polite smile, trying to hide her discomfort. Victor continued, his tone smooth but hinting at something darker. You know, it takes a certain kind of person to walk into this room. Someone willing to bend the rules, even break them. Emma's pulse quickened, and she glanced at Daniel, seeking reassurance. He gave her a slight nod, as if to say, trust me. What exactly are you all involved in? She asked, her voice trembling slightly. Victor exchanged a glance with Daniel before leaning back with a knowing smile. Let's just say we have interests in areas where traditional laws don't quite apply. And those who join us can find themselves very rewarded. Emma's mind raced. She wasn't sure if this was a game, a test, or something more serious. But she couldn't deny the thrill that coursed through her. She felt as though she were teetering on the edge of a cliff, unsure whether to leap or step back. At that moment, Daniel's hand found hers, his touch grounding her amidst the chaos of her thoughts. It's all up to you, Emma, he murmured. But once you're in, there's no turning back. She took a shaky breath, feeling the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She'd come this far, but was she truly ready to commit to a world she barely understood? All right, she whispered, more to herself than to anyone else. I'm in. A murmur of approval rippled through the group, and Daniel's eyes sparkled with satisfaction. She couldn't help but feel like she'd just signed an invisible contract, one she could never undo. As the night wore on, Emma found herself enveloped in conversations she barely understood, hearing whispers of plans and deals that made her head spin. She was deep in this hidden world now, a place where alliances and betrayals danced just beneath the surface. At one point, she excused herself to step outside, the cold night air a welcome relief from the intensity inside. She leaned against the railing, staring out over the city lights, her mind racing. Was this really what she wanted? And if so, could she keep it hidden from Tom? As she stood there, lost in thought, she felt her phone buzz in her purse. She glanced down, expecting another cryptic message from Daniel. But instead, she saw a text from Tom. Miss you. Hope you're having a good time with Sarah. Call me if you need a ride home. Love you. A pang of guilt shot through her, twisting in her chest. She could picture him at home, probably watching TV, waiting up for her. His kindness and patience made her question everything she was doing, everything she was risking. But before she could dwell on it, she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to see Daniel, his expression unreadable as he approached. "Having second thoughts?" he asked, his voice gentle yet probing. Emma shook her head, pushing the doubts to the back of her mind. "No, just thinking." He smiled, though his eyes held a hint of warning. "Thinking can be dangerous in this world. Sometimes, it's better to just act." She nodded, forcing a smile as she let him lead her back inside. But deep down, a small part of her wondered if she'd already gone too far, and if she was willing to pay the price that might come with it. As Emma sank deeper into this mysterious, dangerous world, she felt herself changing. She was becoming more guarded, more secretive, and Tom, perceptive as he was, started to notice. Late one night, she returned home from one of her secretive gatherings with Daniel and his influential acquaintances, only to find Tom waiting up for her, a concerned look etched on his face. "Where have you been?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual, but Emma could sense the tension. "Just out with Sarah again," she lied, forcing a casual smile. But Tom's eyes didn't waver, his concern morphing into something colder, something that made Emma's stomach twist with guilt. "With Sarah again," he repeated, as if testing the words in his mouth. "Emma, it just feels like you've been different. I feel like I don't know you anymore." Emma's heart pounded in her chest. For a brief moment, she considered confessing everything, abandoning this risky, reckless affair with Daniel and his world of corruption and power. But Daniel's voice echoed in her head. "Once you're in, there's no turning back." She nodded, giving Tom a weak smile before slipping into bed beside him, her mind already racing with thoughts of Daniel and the strange path she'd chosen. Emma's commitment to Daniel's clandestine world began affecting every part of her life, even her thoughts and relationships. Daniel introduced her to Hunter, a tall, intimidating man with a military posture and a habit of lingering just out of sight. Emma was cautious around him, but Daniel assured her, saying, "Hunter's my right hand. He's been through it all. He'll teach you everything." During their meetings, Hunter's steely gaze seemed to drill right through Emma, studying her every reaction. She wondered how much he knew about her life with Tom and what Daniel had told him. Every time Hunter whispered advice, like how to lie effectively or avoid detection in public, Emma felt both a surge of thrill and a pang of guilt. Hunter's lessons went beyond simple tactics. They were an introduction to a darker, manipulative world. Under his guidance, she learned how to disguise herself, avoid digital footprints, and even evade surveillance. For the first time, she experienced the intoxicating rush of stepping into a persona entirely different from her old self, leaving Emma feeling powerful but constantly on edge. One night, after a particularly grueling lesson, Emma and Hunter sat in silence. Suddenly, he leaned forward, his voice barely a whisper. "This world isn't for the faint-hearted. People lose everything: relationships, identity. Be ready to let it all go." His words haunted her, amplifying her growing dread that this game with Daniel could be more dangerous than she'd imagined. One evening, during a secret rendezvous, Hunter pulled her aside with an ultimatum. "Emma," he began, "this isn't a game. You're either all in or out." Emma's heart raced. She tried to brush off his intensity, but Hunter's gaze was unrelenting. "There's no halfway. People have died for less." The chilling words made her wonder about Daniel's other allies, those who had crossed him and paid the price. Deep down, Emma was unsure if she could fully abandon her life with Tom, but Hunter's words stirred a need for decisiveness within her. She'd come too far to turn back, and the risks felt exhilarating yet overwhelming. Still, Hunter's dark warning echoed in her mind. People have died for less. Hunter's ominous words filled Emma with dread, but she still held on to the belief that she could somehow keep her two lives separate, protecting Tom from the choices she was making. In this silent, dangerous dance. Every move felt like stepping closer to the edge of a cliff, and she had no way of knowing if Daniel would catch her or let her fall. Tom's suspicions had been brewing for weeks. He saw the exhaustion in Emma's face, noticed how distracted and absent-minded she'd become, and began piecing together the late nights and her flimsy excuses. Finally, unable to ignore his instincts, he checked her phone when she left it unattended. The cryptic messages he found were enough to confirm his worst fears. Conversations with Daniel, hints about secret meetings, veiled references to something big. Tom's mind swirled with anger, betrayal, and disbelief as he read through each message. When Emma returned, Tom was waiting in the living room, holding her phone. His face, normally so calm, was now a mask of betrayal and hurt. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice low but laced with anger. Emma's throat went dry. She could barely form the words to explain. "It's nothing, Tom. Just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" Tom's voice cracked, frustration and fury evident in his tone. "You've been lying to me for weeks. Who is this Daniel?" Seeing her husband's pain brought her own buried guilt to the surface. But rather than admitting the whole truth, Emma resorted to half-truths, claiming she was involved in a secretive but harmless project. Tom's disappointment was palpable, and his final words left her feeling hollow. "I thought you were different, Emma. I thought we had something real." As Emma's life spiraled, Daniel's true nature started to reveal itself in shocking ways. Once, she'd seen him as a charismatic businessman with alluring secrets. Now, she was beginning to see a man capable of ruthless manipulation. Emma witnessed Daniel in a new light when he confronted an associate who hadn't delivered results on a project. His voice, usually charming, was cold and full of menace. "One more failure, and I'll personally make sure you regret it." The shift was jarring, and Emma realized she was involved with someone dangerous, someone willing to hurt others to protect his own interests. Her nights grew restless with fear and regret as she wondered how far Daniel's reach extended and how entangled she'd become in his world. One evening, as she prepared to leave one of Daniel's gatherings, he held her back, whispering, "You're in this for the long haul, Emma. Don't think you can walk away." The warning was laced with a threat, and Emma understood that her life was no longer her own. Desperation clawed at Emma, pushing her to seek an exit. She confided in Hunter, her only ally in this treacherous environment, begging him to help her disappear. Hunter reluctantly agreed to devise a plan. The two plotted her escape meticulously. She'd pretend to go on a trip, leaving a few days buffer before Daniel or his associates noticed her absence. But Emma's emotions were conflicted. She found herself swayed by the thrill of danger even as she feared for her life. As the plan came together, Emma grew increasingly anxious, doubting her resolve. Could she really leave it all, Tom, Daniel, even the sense of power she'd tasted? The fear of what might happen if she stayed fought with her dread of what might happen if she left. Just as Emma prepared to execute her escape, Daniel found out. His reaction was terrifying. Gone was the charming, confident man she'd once admired. In his place was someone cold and violent. "Did you really think you could leave?" he snarled, his grip on her arm painfully tight. "You're nothing without me." Emma tried to break free, her fear mounting as Daniel's anger escalated. At that moment, Hunter appeared, placing himself between them. "She's leaving," he said firmly, staring Daniel down. The tension was palpable as the two men faced off. A vicious fight broke out, with Daniel and Hunter exchanging brutal blows. Emma watched, horrified and paralyzed with fear as they clashed, both men determined to assert dominance. Amidst the chaos, she managed to slip away, her only thought being to get as far from Daniel and his world as possible. Running until she could no longer feel her legs, Emma fled the city under cover of darkness. She had nothing left to tie her to her old life. Not Tom, who likely wanted nothing to do with her, and certainly not Daniel. Finding refuge in a distant city, Emma changed her name, her appearance, and everything about her life, hoping to start anew. But every so often, she'd catch herself glancing over her shoulder, haunted by shadows of her past and the life she'd nearly destroyed in her pursuit of excitement. Emma couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel's influence would haunt her forever. Despite the fresh start, she remained wary and vigilant, knowing that the past might one day catch up with her. And as she settled into her new life, the memories of Daniel's world lingered, tainting every quiet moment with the danger she had narrowly escaped.